We have stopped growing microgreens, and here is why. You know, I'm honestly not surprised that microgreens continue to be popular.
Microgreens are plants harvested just above the soil line after the first tiny leaves sprout. They have a higher concentration of nutrients and flavor than their grown-up counterparts.
I mean, they're kind of easy to grow, they're very simple, they're very good for you, but microgreens have so many pitfalls, and the main thing being cost. See, let's talk about my kale here that's growing in the garden. See, kale, or anything that grows in the garden for that matter, is going to be a macro green. They're not going to be a microgreen. They're a macro green, or just greens, which are still going to be very good for you. You're going to get a ton of fiber. You're going to get a ton of benefits from things like kale or any other greens that you can grow in your garden. And a lot of greens that you can grow in your garden are just simple to grow.
Greens build a strong and healthy body, high in fiber, along with magnesium and vitamin A. You should include lettuce, spinach, collards, turnip greens, kale, and Swiss chard into your diet, as they are all great additions.
But of course, we live in a climate where 6 months of the year, we can't do this. We can't have our garden. Got a winter wonderland out here. So we have to really focus on growing things indoors and figuring out how to grow things indoors. And yes, you can grow things aquaponically, you can grow things hydroponically, but you need a lot more space than you do for something like microgreens, or even growing microgreens hydroponically. They're kind of easy. But if you are not growing your own microgreens, and you're going to be buying them from somebody else, and that's great, there's nothing wrong with buying microgreens from somebody else, but my God, are they expensive.
Those are expensive blueberries.
And even the seeds are super expensive. Now, microgreens, of course, are going to be extremely good for you, and that's awesome. But, here. It's the same as stem cells. That's basically what you're eating, is plant stem cells. So they're gonna be great for you. They're gonna be extremely good for you, but you're gonna have to continuously plant them. You have to buy these seeds continuously, whereas one of those little broccoli seeds, or any of those green seeds, you could actually grow to full term, and then you'd actually have food. You'd actually have a full broccoli. You'd actually have a full cauliflower. You'd have a full head of lettuce, and not just tiny little sprouts. And this certainly isn't to discount anybody's business who grows microgreens. I have friends who grow microgreens, and that's awesome, and they definitely fill a need. But personally, for us, I have no need for microgreens, especially this time of year. In the winter, it's great, especially if we have a surplus of broccoli seeds or any of those seeds to be able to use. But in my mind, it seems like a waste to use those seeds for something other than growing a full vegetable. Okay, let's go back to the garden for a minute. What we want to focus on is being able to grow in abundance during the good season, whether it's berries. We've got a berry trellis here that it's growing like crap right now, but some of them have taken. They're blackberries. I'm really excited about them. But I want to grow in abundance, that we can keep, that we can that we can preserve and freeze, so that we have them throughout the winter time. Is that easy? Absolutely not. Does it require a decent amount of space? Yes. Decent amount of planning? Also yes. But at least you're not buying a ton of microgreen seeds, and you're not having to worry about keeping space and trays of all of these things in your basement and keeping them alive and running the power for those lights to keep them. It just seems to me like microgreens are just a fad. And there's a ton of ways to learn how to do it, and a ton of people are going to teach you how to do it and make money online or make money growing microgreens, and that's great. Again, I don't want to discount anybody's business, but when it comes to microgreens versus regular greens, or microgreens versus gardening versus farming, I would pick gardening every time. Every single time, because look at the abundance that we can produce. And yes, it takes a little longer, and yes, it's a little more difficult, but the financial investment just isn't there. Investing in growing microgreens is going to be expensive. Somebody's testing out their gun for hunting season. But investing in seeds for microgreens and constantly trying to grow these is expensive. So it just, to me, doesn't feel lucrative to be able to constantly be growing microgreens for things that just go bad so quickly. Like kale, or not kale, spinach. Spinach and lettuce goes bad so quickly. I would rather grow things that are going to give me more abundance. I'd rather spend the extra time and effort trying to figure out how to grow things hydroponically or aquaponically even, so we have the fish, so that we don't have to worry about trying to grow trays and trays and trays of microgreens, you know? That's just my take. I'm just not a huge fan of microgreens. One, because I'm bitter because I struggled to grow them, but two, it just doesn't seem worth it to me. A little bit of greens and a salad, like that's not gonna fill you up, whereas a whole broccoli, a whole cauliflower, the recipes that you can make, cauliflower wings and broccoli in every meal, it seems a lot better than just growing a little bitty tiny tray of microgreens. So I filmed that video a little over a month ago. I was high on the season, really excited about all the abundance and things we were harvesting from the garden, and my thoughts now have changed a little bit, as you can tell. The season's colder. Now let me show you my garden now. Looks a little different, doesn't it? So here you can see we've picked everything. I've even got my tiller there. I've started tilling it. We're putting the chickens through it. And that is the kale that I was just talking about. So again, I was excited. I was amped up about the garden, about everything we were harvesting. And don't get me wrong, we've still got a lot of stuff ready. A lot of stuff in the freezer, a lot of stuff in cans and ready to go. But when it comes to microgreens, now that we don't have fresh stuff, that we don't have fresh produce, like look, the birds have been getting to the kale. It's gonna get tilled in here soon. Now that we don't have fresh produce every day, I'm thinking of starting back up with the microgreens. See, look, it's kind of a disaster in here, but this is still all the stuff that we have, fresh produce that we have in our garden shed here. Lots of pumpkins and squash and stuff, and some things that are drying. But despite all of this, I want to have fresh greens. You can see that we've got some like lemon balm and oregano, and over there we've got some parsley still growing, but I want to have fresh greens again. I want to have salads. I want to like feel good, right? And even in here, it's quite nice. It's quite warm. And so throughout the winter time, I think I'm going to get back into growing microgreens. And actually even more than microgreens, I just want to grow greens. I want to be able to grow these herbs that we have here. Even some, we got basil and mint in the window. I want to be able to grow those things through the winter time so that we can continue to have those. There's some great YouTube channels that I follow, like Arcopia. He's got a 4-season greenhouse. We don't have a greenhouse, and we live in a tiny house. Space is at a premium in our house, so it makes it difficult to be able to put stuff where we need it to go, and that's why growing microgreens for us is kind of a hassle, because we don't just have a garage that we can put these things or a spare room that we can put these in. We barely have a bedroom enough for us and the kids. So we're trying to figure out where those things belong and where they can go, and I think right now they're going to end up in my office downstairs, and so yeah, it's kind of a sacrifice for us anyway. And I would figure if somebody's got an apartment instead of a house, it would be a sacrifice of a room or a sacrifice of some other space. But it's easy. It's relatively easy to be able to grow microgreens. And I learned last year, I mean, it takes some trial and error, and you get a bag of those seeds or get a giant bag of those seeds and continue to grow them. And maybe if you're able to support yourself, if you're able to sell some on the side to be able to support buying them and actually turn it into a business, then you won't have to worry as much about the cost of it. So although I stopped growing microgreens for the season, we had a baby, it was crazy, the garden was wild and growing, I think maybe we'll get back into microgreens. And maybe we might sell them, which would be another benefit to be able to make a little bit of cash on the side there. We'll see about that. But it'll be something that we can grow. It'll be fresh greens that we can have on a regular basis. And because our garden out there is kind of defunct now and the season's kind of over, I think getting back into microgreens is what I got to do.